The studio lights bathed the set in a warm, intentional glow, engineered not just to illuminate but to soften. The Daily Show's signature skyline loomed behind Trevor Noah, cool blues and oranges casting a false sense of calm. The applause had just died down, leaving behind a tension so subtle it pulsed beneath the laughter. Robert Downey Jr. sat across from Trevor with the poise of a man who had nothing left to prove or lose. Dressed in a muted suit, his expression was unreadable, even as Trevor leaned forward with his signature grin, the one that both invited and disarmed. "So, let's talk about the comeback," Trevor said, smooth as ever. "Do you think America forgave you or just forgot your sins?" The crowd chuckled. Polite, safe, trained. Downey didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He let the words hang in the air like the smell of something burning. For a moment, he simply stared not at Trevor but through him. Then with a slow inhale he answered, "And do you think comedy ever really forgave you for what you did to it?" The audience froze. Laughter caught in their throats, unsure whether to release it or swallow it whole. Trevor's smirk twitched, faltered. Downey leaned back, his tone velvet but lethal. "You're not interviewing me. You're performing. And I didn't come here for a script, a beat, dead air." Somewhere in the control room, a producer clenched their headset. What began as a celebration of survival had just become a trial by fire, and the jury was watching live. Trevor straightened, slightly crossing one leg over the other, a reflexive act of regaining control. The crowd laughed again, this time more nervously, reaching for the comfort of rhythm. But the rhythm was broken. "I perform?" Trevor echoed, keeping his voice light, but his eyes sharp. "I ask questions, Robert. That's what this seat is for." Downey tilted his head. "Is it? Because from here it looks more like a very expensive mirror." Trevor let out a short, practiced chuckle, not too defensive, not too open. "Well, that's the job, reflecting the moment, asking what people are already thinking." Robert leaned forward now, his elbows on the desk between them. His voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone who had faced harder things than pushback. "No. You're not asking what people are thinking. You're asking what the internet wants to hear. You're surfing waves you didn't make, safe waves, viral waves, but not truth." The audience murmured, not laughter, not applause, a shifting discomfort. Trevor's smile thinned. "I've spent years challenging power, presidents, CEOs, billionaires. If that's not truth, what is?" Downey didn't blink. "You challenged them when it was safe to. Zuckerberg sat here. You had him in your chair, hands folded like a student at roll call, and you let him walk out unbruised. That wasn't journalism. That was networking." Trevor's voice tightened. "I'm not a prosecutor, Robert. This isn't a courtroom." Robert nodded slowly. "Exactly, it's a theater. And I'm saying, maybe your audience deserves something more than clever monologues and righteous applause." The room grew quieter still. A camera operator adjusted his lens but didn't dare breathe too loudly. "You want to know what forgiveness looks like?" Downey's voice dropped into something slower, darker. "It looks like years with no cameras, no applause, just silence and shame, and the brutal work of rebuilding your soul brick by brick. You think I'm here for a redemption arc? I'm here because I survived long enough to smell the bullshit." Trevor's jaw flexed. "And what? You're here to cleanse us all with your pain?" Robert gave the faintest shrug. "No, I'm here to remind people that pain isn't performance, that you don't earn integrity by going viral." That line landed hard, and Trevor, for the first time, looked not just rattled, but offended. "Careful, man. You're starting to sound like the kind of guy who thinks comedy should be quiet unless it agrees with him." Downey gave a half smile. "I love comedy. I just hate when it forgets who it's supposed to punch." That stopped everything. There was no laughter now, just stillness. And the slow realization, both on stage and in the audience, that this was no longer late-night TV. This was a collision course between two men who had both built empires on pain. One through survival, the other through satire. and only one of them was ready to burn the blueprint. Robert Downey Jr. leaned back, his posture relaxed but eyes razor-sharp, the posture of someone who had already lived through his worst day and knew it. "You want to talk about performance, Trevor?" he said softly. "Let me show you something that wasn't." He looked out into the audience, his voice almost casual, but only on the surface. "I spent nights in a jail cell, not metaphorically. I mean actual concrete, metal bed frame, echoing scream down the hall kind of jail. I've had my hands cuffed behind my back while paparazzi shouted my name like it was a punchline, and it was. For years I was the cautionary tale behind every Hollywood joke. The punchline people used to feel better about themselves. The audience was silent. No applause, no snickers, just breath held. I lost jobs, friends. I lost my son for a time. You know how it feels to have a 5-year-old look at you like a stranger? To wonder if he'll remember you by the time you're sober enough to show up again. Trevor looked down briefly, his usual composure giving way to something quieter, more human. Robert continued, his voice firmer now. And I don't bring that up to win sympathy. I bring it up because when you talk about redemption or comeback stories or second chances, you forget what those things cost. He paused, then leaned in slightly. I didn't get my redemption from America. I dragged it out of the dirt with my bare hands. I didn't get a brand deal. I didn't get applause. I got court-mandated rehab and a Hollywood blacklist. Trevor met his gaze again. No one's discounting your journey, man. But everyone's carrying something. Just because you did it under spotlights doesn't make it heavier. Robert smiled faintly. No. But it makes it louder. And I've had to live with the echo. He shifted forward, tone sharpening. But here's where it gets tricky. Somewhere along the way, people started treating pain like a resume. Trauma as marketing. And I see it everywhere now. Memoirs, podcasts, Instagram posts, people bleeding on cue because someone told them that scars sell. Trevor frowned. Isn't that a little harsh? People are just trying to heal out loud. Out loud, Robert echoed. Or on camera. The words hung like smoke. You want to talk about healing? He asked. Healing is quiet, it's brutal, it's not pretty, and it sure as hell doesn't trend. The audience barely moved. Robert exhaled more softly now. There's a difference between using your past to build something and using it to build a brand. I had to fight to become a man my son could trust again. That wasn't a story. That was survival. Trevor didn't interrupt. For once, there was no retort, only a flicker of respect in his expression, muted by something more complicated. Guilt, maybe. Or recognition. Robert looked up again, sweeping his gaze over the silent crowd. You asked me earlier if America forgave me. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't, but it doesn't matter. Because I stopped needing its forgiveness the day I stopped lying to myself. A long beat passed. The lights above them hummed faintly, the kind of white noise that makes you feel how quiet the world can be when nobody is clapping. Then Trevor finally said, "That's heavy, man." Robert gave a quiet laugh. No, that's honest. And for the first time, it didn't feel like The Daily Show, it felt like confession. Trevor shifted in his chair. The air had changed, heavier now. Even the audience felt it. What had started as sharp banter had turned into something darker, something real. He took a breath. You know, Trevor said slowly, you talk a lot about redemption, about struggle. But that path you walked, getting forgiven, getting roles again, the comeback, that path doesn't exist for everyone. Robert raised an eyebrow. Trevor's voice tightened. Because let's be honest, you're a white man in America. You were allowed to fall, and then you were allowed to rise again. Some of us don't get the rise. We get the fall, and then we get forgotten. Murmurs stirred in the crowd. Support, discomfort, both. The tension shifted again, alive and moving. Robert didn't react at first. Then he gave a small nod, the kind that says, I've heard this before, and I've thought about it longer than you think. You're not wrong, he said finally. There are different rules. But the question is, if you know the rules are broken, why are you still playing their game? Trevor blinked. What's that supposed to mean? Robert leaned forward. You've built your careers brilliantly, I'll admit, by navigating a system that profits off selective outrage. You're sharp, thoughtful, funny as hell. But every time you got close to the real edge, you pulled back. You made it palatable. You made it marketable. Trevor's eyes narrowed. So I'm not angry enough for you? Robert shook his head. No, I'm saying, maybe you're not free. The words struck like a quiet explosion. No insult, no curse, just a deep, destabilizing truth. You've got global reach, Robert continued. You've got the mic, you've got the seat. But when a black South African man who grew up under apartheid is more careful than the white Hollywood burnout who used to pass out in Malibu driveways, something's off. The silence was louder now. Trevor broke it. You think I don't speak truth because I don't yell it? No, Robert said. I think you measure your truth against what the sponsors will tolerate. That line landed hard. The studio audience, usually so reliable with its claps and cues, didn't know where to go. Applause? Protest? Nothing came. Trevor's jaw clenched. Robert said, calm but insistent. You sit there and talk about pain. I'm saying call it about redemption. Don't pretend the lens is clean. And then you throw stones at someone who's trying to speak to a global audience without getting shut down. The studio voice felt smaller now, heavy with tension. Then say that. Every camera angle, every microphone captured more than words. But don't sell it as unfiltered truth. It captured the gravity of accountability without risk. In real time. That's branding. The audience, not bravery, usually a source of laughter. Trevor looked away for a beat, had become a silent hand witness. Flexing slightly over his cue card. Trevor Noah shifted in his chair. The prompter. Fingers. You don't get to judge how I carry my story. People expect me to be entertaining. You didn't live it, he said quietly. Robert nodded. They expect me to balance criticism with humor. But I judged myself harder than anyone else ever did. The jokes come first. That's why I walked through hell and came back sober. Robert Downey Jr. That's why I didn't stay someone else's story. Cutting. I became my own. That's the point. Humor is powerful. It can shine a light on injustice, reveal hypocrisy. No yelling, but when it becomes a gesture, when the microphone who had lived too much and lost too much to pretend anymore, then it's no longer Trevor truth. Sat back, hands clasped now, jaw tight. He smiled. Faint murmur rippled not through with the joy, audience, but as a kind of shield. Nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably, he said, sensing the uncomfortable truth. We've already started. The crowd remained frozen. A global platform, caught between discomfort and awe. Unsure which side they were meant to cheer for. What you choose to amplify. This wasn't satire anymore. Shapes the way the world sees morality. This was war, power, and consequence. Robert Downey Jr. shifted slightly, few admit, resting, and fewer carry his hands in his lap. Trevor's jaw, if they had ever been on, were now completely off. I try to be thoughtful. His tone remained steady, nuance, but the fire behind his words had grown. Nuance doesn't trend. There was a time, he began, Robert's eyes when locked, pain was something he worked through. Nuance also doesn't sell your soul, that's the difference. Trevor's eyebrows raised. For a moment silence fell. You think people are faking their lights became the only sound. Robert shook his head. The audience holding their collective breath. No. I think they're learning to pack a joke. Market it. It was a reckoning. Monetize it. Trevor's voice softened. And I think a system that rewards public pain will always produce performers. Do you think I don't feel the weight? Survivors. The audience murmured again. I don't struggle between the decisions I make on air. Trevor leaned forward, calm and deliberate. You really believe that people who speak about their measure of responsibility isn't how hard you feel in? It's how far you're willing to go when no one is watching. Simply, that's where truth lives. I believe the ones who do it. For healing, a young woman in the front row glanced at her neighbor, whispering, I believe the loudest stories aren't always the truest. Others and I believe the pain Olympics silent endorsements of a moral truth unfolding before the mic is a race nobody wins. Robert's tone shifted. Trevor scoffed softly. Almost a lesson. That's cynical. People look for heroes. It's honest. Or for villains. Replied. Look rarely for honesty. Every podcast has a breakdown. For courage. Every influencer's platform gives you a choice. Perform for the applause or speak for the world. You think that if you choose the latter, it will cost you product. Not likes, not radio was silent again. It will cost you your comfort. Robert continued. Trevor, his voice lower slowly, leaning back. People aren't healing, they're looping. Keeping the wounds open so they can keep telling the story. Because the moment they actually move on, the audience disappears. Stay comfortable. Trevor's tone, sharp but impossible, is the only thing worth doing. So people should just suffer in silence? The audience remained silent, the gravity of the exchange sinking in. No, Robert said calmly. No applause. I'm saying healing is sacred. Only the understanding that sacred things don't need an algorithm. Television. Two men landed with force. 2 lives, Two legacies
Trevor glanced toward the
converging in a
camera,
crucible of
almost
accountability.
instinctively.
Then
And in
back to
that
Robert.
silence,
The unspoken
your
verdict
making
was
it
clear.
sound like all of culture is just a big
The
scam.
audience was listening.
That people are faking hurt to
Really
stay
listening.
relevant.
For the
Robert's
first
gaze
time.
didn't waver.
I'm saying we've
The
confused
stage had
visibility
shifted.
with truth. Comedy
We've
was no
taught
longer
people
that the only way
the
to matter
shield.
is to be broken. Performance was no
Publicly.
longer the armor. That's not
The
healing.
truth
was naked, and everyone
That's
in the room
addiction
could
by
feel
another
it.
name.
Trevor crossed his arms. You know, it's interesting. You talk about the loop, about people never letting go of their pain. But aren't you the one still talking about your jail time, your lowest points, 2 decades later? Robert smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The difference is I'm not selling it, I'm owning it. There's a big gap between confession and content. The crowd rustled again. One woman up front leaned forward, hands clasped in her lap. A man near the back crossed his arms, torn between nodding and wincing. Robert looked out again, not at Trevor but past him. I lost everything. Not figuratively, literally. Friends stopped calling. Studios closed doors. I was unemployable. And when I finally clawed my way back, I didn't tell that story to get likes. I told it so the next guy would know it could be done. His voice softened, but not the weight. I don't need people to feel sorry for me. I need them to understand that not every crack is a spotlight. Some are meant to be sealed. Trevor exhaled, quiet but firm. And what about platforms like this? Are we just feeding the machine? Robert looked directly at him. You tell me. The lights overhead hummed quietly. Somewhere, a stage manager glanced at their cue sheet. But nobody moved. Trevor hesitated. I try to bring truth. Here. I try to open conversations. Robert nodded once. Then open the ones that don't sell. For a moment, the tension wasn't between two men. It was between a culture obsessed with exposure and a man refusing to be exposed. Trevor's jaw tensed. He'd held his composure through the jabs, the confessions, the provocations. But now, Robert Downey Jr. was pushing into territory that wasn't just ideological. It was ancestral. You know, Trevor said carefully, I come from a country where truth got people killed. Where silence wasn't healing, it was complicity. Robert nodded slowly. I know that. That's why I'm asking. Why does someone who came from revolution speak like he's still afraid of one? The studio quieted. The lights didn't flicker, but something in the air dimmed. Trevor stiffened. I speak the way I do because I'm speaking to the world, not just the angry corners of it. Exactly, Robert said. You've got the mic. You've got the reach. But when you had the chance to speak up about certain regimes, when the world needed a real voice, you went quiet. Trevor blinked. You're talking about what? My stance on Israel? Palestine? Africa? What exactly are you accusing me of? Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm saying you're selective. You've condemned American racism with fire. But when it comes to African dictators? When it comes to state violence outside the West? You tiptoe. You sanitize. Trevor's mouth opened, then closed. He was rarely at a loss for words. But this wasn't satire. This was character assassination, dressed in velvet. I'm not a foreign policy expert, he said finally. I'm a comedian, a host. Robert leaned forward, eyes sharp. No, you're a symbol. To millions of people, especially in the global South, you are what a voice of justice looks like. And when you go quiet, it teaches them that some power is safe to mock, and some isn't. A ripple of unease moved through the audience. This wasn't what they'd signed up for, but they couldn't look away. Trevor's tone dropped, defensive now. It's complicated. Not everything is black and white. Robert nodded. I know. That's why truth matters more, not less. And when you choose to say nothing while selling the image of resistance, that's not complexity. That's strategy. Long silence. Trevor's voice cracked just slightly as he spoke. You don't know what it's like to carry a nation's story in your mouth. You don't know the pressure. No, Robert said. But I know what it's like to lose everything, for saying the wrong thing, and I still said it. That hit harder than anything before, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. You didn't grow up under apartheid, Trevor snapped. You didn't watch soldiers storm houses. You didn't have to learn comedy as camouflage. Robert paused. His voice was low, almost a whisper now. And maybe that's why you still wear it. Trevor looked at him then, really looked at him, and behind the anger was something older. Grief. Guilt. The burden of being a global voice that never asked for the weight it carried. Robert didn't gloat. He just stared with the gaze of someone who had been publicly flayed and still chose not to run. The audience wasn't laughing, they weren't clapping. They were witnessing something few live tapings ever deliver, unfiltered confrontation. Two men from vastly different worlds, both scarred, both storytellers, and both unwilling to give ground. Trevor leaned back, slowly. He didn't speak for several seconds, and when he did, it was quiet. Maybe I am careful, maybe too careful, but careful is how I stayed alive. Robert nodded once, solemn. Then maybe it's time to risk something more than survival. And with that, the conversation shifted again. No longer a clash of egos, but a battle for legacy. The tension had shifted. Trevor sat straighter now, not with defiance, but with a cautious attentiveness. Robert's gaze was unflinching, the kind that reads every gesture, every micro-expression. You know, Robert began, voice steady. We talk a lot about culture, about wokeness, about accountability, but underneath all of that, what are we really afraid of? Trevor raised an eyebrow. Afraid of what? Of being honest with ourselves. Of facing the parts of us that are messy, flawed, dangerous. Masculinity, power, identity, all of it is a mirror, and most of us are terrified of what we'll see. Trevor exhaled slowly. I get that. But society is already quick to punish men, to call out mistakes, to shame. It's a minefield. Robert leaned forward. Exactly. But here's the point. The problem isn't the scrutiny, it's the dishonesty. Pretending to be better than you are, hiding behind charm or cleverness. That's the real danger. The audience was silent. Even the crew seemed aware that the conversation had veered into something intensely personal, beyond staged comedy or ratings. Look at Hollywood, Robert continued. Predators still work, victims still wait. And the culture of performative outrage didn't fix that. It rebranded it. Wokeness is now the mask everyone wears, instead of action. Trevor's voice sharpened. So you're saying we shouldn't call people out? That we shouldn't challenge the system? No, Robert said, calm but insistent. I'm saying call it out, but don't pretend the lens is clean. Don't sell virtue as a product, and don't confuse applause with integrity. The studio felt smaller now, heavy with tension. Every camera angle, every microphone captured more than words. It captured the gravity of accountability in real time. The audience, usually a source of laughter and applause, had become a silent witness. Trevor Noah shifted in his chair, fingers brushing the edge of the desk. People expect me to be entertaining, he said quietly. They expect me to balance criticism with humor, but sometimes it feels like the jokes come first and the conscience comes second. Robert Downey Jr. nodded, voice steady but cutting. And that's the point. Humor is powerful. It can shine a light on injustice, reveal hypocrisy. But when it becomes a shield, when the microphone is a barrier between you and responsibility, then it's no longer truth. It's performance. A faint murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the uncomfortable truth in Robert's words. You've built a global platform, Robert continued. Millions watch. And what you choose to amplify, or ignore, shapes the way the world sees morality, power, and consequence. That's a weight few admit, and fewer carry willingly. Trevor's jaw tightened. I try to be thoughtful, to bring nuance, but nuance doesn't go viral. Nuance doesn't trend. Robert's eyes locked with his. Nuance also doesn't sell your soul, that's the difference. For a moment silence fell. The hum of the studio lights became the only sound, the audience holding their collective breath. This wasn't a late-night joke. It was a reckoning. Trevor's voice softened, almost confessional. Do you think I don't feel the weight? That I don't struggle with the decisions I make on air? Robert leaned back, calm and deliberate. I don't doubt it. But the measure of responsibility isn't how hard you feel it. It's how far you're willing to go when no one is watching. That's where truth lives. A young woman in the front row glanced at her neighbor, whispering, "He's right." Others nodded, silent endorsements of a moral truth unfolding before them. Robert's tone shifted, quieter now, almost a lesson. People look for heroes, or for villains, rarely for honesty, rarely for courage. But the platform gives you a choice: perform for the applause or speak for the world. And if you choose the latter, it will cost you. Not likes, not ratings. It will cost you your comfort. Trevor exhaled slowly, leaning back, processing. You make it sound impossible. Robert smiled faintly. It is, if you want to. Stay comfortable. But impossible is the only thing worth doing. The audience remained silent, the gravity of the exchange sinking in. No laughter, no applause, only the understanding that they were witnessing something beyond television. Two men, two lives, two legacies converging in a crucible of accountability. And in that silence, the unspoken verdict was clear. The audience was listening, really listening, for the first time. The stage had shifted. Comedy was no longer the shield. Performance was no longer the armor. The truth was naked, and everyone in the room could feel it.